Morning. This is John from the Springs Mennonite Church, and I'm here today to start a new week and a new topic. I wanna do something I haven't done before, and I want to look at one chapter about one incident in the Old Testament. I think it's a very powerful one and one we can learn something from. And so I want to spend the week talking about 1 Samuel chapter 17. And this chapter is the story of David and Goliath. And you've probably heard it, you've probably read it, you probably even know it. But for those of you who don't, let me set the stage for this discussion this week, this sharing, from the very first part of the chapter, 1 Samuel chapter 17, verses 3 through 7. And let's look at the sides in this argument. Beginning with verse 3. So the Philistines and the Israelites faced each other on opposite hills with a valley between them. Okay, you get that? You got the Philistines on one side, a valley, and the Hebrews on the other side. Now they're at war. They did a lot of that in the Old Testament, unfortunately. And so they're standing each on each side. And in a typical fashion, a champion from one side would challenge a champion from the other side. And that's what happens in verse 4. Then Goliath, a Philistine champion from Gath, came out of the Philistine ranks to face the forces of Israel. Now, this part would be fairly standard. This is what you would expect to happen in this time, in this kind of a place at a war. The champion would come out, challenge the champion on the other side, and they would fight. And often, depending on which one won, the other side would leave, and they would submit to the outcome of that fight. But in this case, the champion's a little different than what Israel was expecting, probably what anybody would have been expecting in those days. So let's read a little bit more. Goliath was over 9 feet tall. Now that's big. I used to teach at the University of Kentucky, and I had a lot of the basketball players in there. I had several players that were 6'10", 6'11", 7 feet, and that's tall, particularly when you're standing next to them and your neck is like this, trying to trying to converse with them. But this guy's 9 feet. He can't walk in the rooms of most people's houses. So he's 9 feet tall. He wore a bronze helmet, and his bronze coat of mail, which was armor, weighed 125 pounds. He also wore bronze leg armor and carried a bronze javelin on his shoulder. The shaft of his spear was as heavy and thick as a weaver's beam, tipped with an iron spearhead that weighed 15 pounds. His armor bearer walked ahead of him carrying a shield. And Goliath stood and shouted a taunt to the Israelites. Why are you all coming out to fight? Choose one man to come down here and fight me. So here are the sides. Philistines over here, got a valley, Hebrews over here. Goliath comes down and shouts to the Hebrews, send me your champion and we'll fight. Well, if you had been there, or as someone once jokingly said, if Israeli TV had been there, what would you think about this guy? He was mammoth. To say he was intimidating, that's a huge understatement. This guy was huge, and his armor was huge. And the thought that he could have this upper armor that weighed 125 pounds and a spear that was so long and heavy, and the arrowhead on the spear weighed 15 pounds. I mean, who in their right mind would take on this guy? And the Philistines know that. And they are hugely confident that they're going to win this battle and the war. Why? Because their champion is huge. Well, let's stop here a minute. I will say this, that the champion of the Hebrews isn't quite so big, and I'll read about that over this week. But this champion of the Philistines reminds me of the problems that you and I have. They seem insurmountable. There's no way to overcome them. And those problems want to dictate to us what we can and can't do. Now, you know what I'm talking about? You ever been there? I've been there. Life is full of opportunities to be overwhelmed. Sometimes you don't have to look very far. And I think of the Hebrews over here on this hillside looking down at that guy, and it's like, whoa, where did he come from? How did this happen? What are we going to do? Well, I'm not gonna get into that just yet. But I can tell you, there weren't many takers to this challenge. Uh, Saul didn't have, uh, you know, hundreds of volunteers that said, pick me, pick me. I want to go, I want to go. In fact, I don't think anybody wanted to go. And why would they? You'd have to be crazy in the head to want to tackle this monster. And sometimes our lives are full of monsters, and we don't want to tackle them. We're afraid, just like the Hebrews were afraid. And it's understandable that we would be afraid. But just like these couple of verses aren't the end of the story, being afraid isn't the end of the story either. In fact, being afraid, as in this story, is nothing more than the first step at finding the solution. Let me say that again. Being afraid is nothing more than the first step in finding the solution. Well, I'm going to leave you on that thought because I don't want to take up all of my thoughts in one day. And I want you to think about in your life who or what is your Goliath. We all have one. And that's the way it is. But in the midst of having that Goliath, we're not left alone either. So you come back tomorrow. I'll be back. And we'll talk some more about this story and how it applies to our lives. Thanks for listening. If you have a prayer concern or a need, let us know. We'll do everything we can as fast as we can to help meet your need. God bless you. I'll be back tomorrow and I'll share another idea.